coming into the heads up battle, I was watching this player and we had played a couple hands together where I observed that he was very likely being overly aggressive in certain spots where I thought he should not be. Yeah, when you play live poker, you really want to pay really close attention to not just sizings, the lines that people take, but you also want to pay really close attention to the timings. And you can really infer a lot about where someone is at in their range once you get good at this because if someone has a close decision or is higher up in their range, if you're paying really close attention, you can compare situations and see where they have actually where that actually is pretty reliable. But yeah, so going into the heads up battle, I just thought that he was going to be probably a bit too aggressive in most situations. Yeah, and so then opening the queen jack, I decided to go for the 2.5x open, just trying to get a little bit more fold equity pre-flop. So he had me at about a 4-1 chip disadvantage about 20 minutes prior. So I had a great deal of momentum coming into this spot. So I was already kind of feeling like he may try to do something because he had been trying to make a couple moves and I had either sniffed them out or rebluffed him in some of those spots. So on this flop, 10-4-6, two hearts. In game, I just thought it was a board where I was going to bet not super frequently, probably anywhere from 50 to 70% of the time. So generally, and speaking in those situations, I want to size up with my bet. So I went with around a 2/3 pot size bet. This is where I'd say like the first inflection point is for me because I think my hand is a very natural continuation bet with the one heart and the backdoor straight draw and backdoor flush draw possibilities plus the two overcards. I can make very strong top pairs when called. My top pairs are very unlikely to be dominated because he's just not going to have hands like ace jack, ace queen, and probably very little king jack or king queen because those hands would probably three bet pre. So I would be feeling very good about turning a top pair. So my hand is a very natural bet. And when I get check raised on the flop, the first thing that I'm thinking is what bluffs does my opponent have available to them and what is the value? And so when I looked at this board, I just look and I see hands like 2-5 suited, 5-3 suited, 8-5 suited, 7-5 suited, 8-7 suited, 8-9, and even hands like Jack-9, Queen-9, Jack-8, Queen-8 suited, the backdoor ones. You will see hands like that get check raised, one higher and one lower with the backdoor flush draw, higher and lower than the top card. So those hands I think are the most kind of natural check raise bluffs, along with all of the flush draws that my opponent could have. So I'm really trying to identify all of those bluffs because I'm trying to figure out how much equity I think I have versus the hands that are going to raise. I think his value is going to be hands like two pair, hands like 6-4 suited, 10-4 suited, pocket sixes. And you will see hands like ace 10 or king 10 get check raised here quite a lot, was what I assumed. And against the most common value, which is the ace 10 and the king 10, I thought that I had pretty clean outs with the queen and the jack, as well as the backdoors. So overall, I just thought that I was going to have too much equity to fold my hand right now. And I thought that I would be able to bluff on some runouts with just the single heart. We were also a bit deep. So we started this hand around 50 big blinds deep. So um, I was deep enough to be able to peel and have some maneuverability on the Turner River. I briefly considered raising back the flop because of my gut told me that I thought that he was a bit out of line here, but I think calling was the right play. On the four, I expected my opponent to be somewhat passive here, given all the bluffs that he has available to him on the flop. So many of those are just very low equity when called on the flop and the turn is a four. And I just think in terms of theory, he's going to want to do a lot of checking here, even with some of his strongest hands like ace 10, king 10, probably mixed betting and checking. And then mostly wanting to check with hands like 6-4, 10-4, and pocket sixes. So when he decides to check the turn, I expected to be facing that wide range of bluffs and then that very narrow range of value. And I was more interested in playing against all of the weaker hands that I mentioned, all of the draws, than I was building a pot against the top pairs and potentially some of the 6x. Now on the river, I was feeling pretty good about my hand when I saw the king on the check line. I expected to face a bet somewhat often and be in a fairly tough situation. I was very surprised when he went all in. I think you can see from my reaction initially. I was like, what is going on here? I think at this spot, like, I'm definitely, I never like got to this spot and thought like, oh, I'm gonna call this guy with queen high if he goes all in or makes a big bet. More than anything, I'm just kind of playing the hand in flow, making the best decisions that I think I can, and reacting to what story my opponent is telling me. And my initial instinct was to call, and it was a bit of a surprising one for me, so I started to follow that down. And the big thing to think about here is, as I mentioned, all of these draws. So even the hands like, the lowest ones, I said deuce five, three, five, five, seven, eight, five, those ones. I was thinking he may only have the suited combos of those, but he definitely, I thought, had all of the offsuit combinations of the hands like seven, five, eight, eight, seven, eight, nine, which significantly increased the amounts of bluffs that he can have. So with that, the tricky thing always in these situations is these are the bluffs that are available to my opponent. Now, how often is he going to choose to take those bluffs? And that's what we always have to try to figure out as like a poker player. And if I was playing against someone who I thought was more studied, which my impression of Colin at the time was that he was not very studied, then I would have to be much more cautious about calling a river bet like this, because all of this is true against, some great poker player, that they have all these bluffs available to them. But the big difference is that while they have all these bluff combos in their range to choose from, they're not going to choose all of these hands to bluff with every time. They're going to be more balanced in their approach when going for the check raise line. So, against a more studied player, I have to be very cautious about calling this bet, which I think against a good player, I would just, I say I'm a studied player. I would probably just fold my hand, because I would expect them to be more in line with not having too many bluffs. And the big reason why once I kind of went through all the possible combinations, the thing that clicked for me to in order to click call was that I suspected that my opponent was incapable of randomizing in any way or restricting himself and choosing these bluff combinations too frequently. So I just assumed that he was going to be over bluffing in this spot. So I thought my hand made for a pretty nice call, beating all of what I perceived to be the bluffs. I briefly thought, I think you can even hear me say, "Do I lose to any bluffs?" And I just said, "No, I don't think I do."
Did I lose to a bluff? I don't think so.
And so, it was for all those reasons I decided that calling was going to be the right play. And, these things are always tough because, like, if you're wrong, you might be on YouTube here and get all the views, but for the wrong reason. I might be doing this interview, a bit more shamefully than I am now. So you kind of have to make peace with that when you decide to step out and make a big decision like this. And I think, all the years of experience I have of trusting myself and being okay with dealing with the mob is was enough for me to just trust my intuition and go for the call.
This is just amazing that he is
5, 3, 5, 8, 7, 8, 9. Value is like king 10, 4x. I call.
Yeah, I mean, he can definitely also have a king 10 in his range, and I thought about that too. But I think I also have to think that he's going to use a smaller size sometimes too with a lot of those value hands. So yeah, I was just so surprised to see the hand of Jack 3. But you know, all the bluffs that I mentioned, if we're adding in even more hands like Jack 3 and potentially more, my call is in theory just making so much money. I think I think any professional kind of analyzing this, looking at all the combos and likely the frequency at which my opponent is likely to choose them, this spot is doing really well for making a call.